Welcome to the Bladtcast, the alternate cast. Yes, Christian Blatt here, Will Starling, and a couple of Jeffs.
Yeah.
The one, the only, Jeff Winstead making his triumphant return to the Bladtcast. I was going to say, Jeff Winstead, this is the first time you're on with both Will, Jeff, and myself, but I think we did that for Thor Ragnarok or Justice League or Aquaman. That's what it was.
Yeah. That was. We did that quickly at Will's place.
Back when movie theaters were a thing.
That's right.
Remember that?
There's the Dave the Dog cameo. You get to meet Dave.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, but now everyone's seeing, although I guess we all saw each other. But people can watch us if they want to see this on the Bladtcast YouTube channel. So that's the difference. That's the exciting thing right here. So obviously, Will Starling's here, Jeff DeRay's here. I'm Christian Blatt. That's Jeff Winstead. And for those that aren't watching, they're missing out on Jeff's sweet new background that I think is very appropriate. So I completely get the one on the left. I know that's Flash. But you tell Marvel Boy, what's that blue thing that's the other Flash logo?
Are you asking me or Will?
I'm asking Jeff because I have no idea.
Yeah, you.
This
you
one
tell me
is,
because it's the show and they fuck everything up, so I can't wait what you say.
Is that
I
what
didn't
it
watch
is?
I stopped watching the show a long time ago, but I'll tell you what I'm assuming this is: cooler Flash, because the Flash's colors are gay, and this is way cooler, and
So,
he needed a reboot.
You're saying it's Cool Ranch Wally West?
Yeah, there's a nacho cheese and a Cool Ranch.
Nacho Wally.
And is there a fire Barry Allen? Like a spicy Barry Allen?
FYRE Barry Allen, because
what's the other one?
He doesn't exist.
What's it called? Shoot, I'm drawing a blank.
Doom?
It's fine. No, the other Dorito flavor I'm drawing a blank on.
Mountain Dew Code Red. Which one, Jeff Winstead?
Yeah, I just assume, like, on the show, like, isn't every season the villain another speedster? So is it like probably Dark Flash or something? It's not the cool reverse Flash.
I think it's like a silly.
It's probably Zoom.
Zoom they did as this like blue pattern thing, which was Hunter Zolomon, which was the Wally Zoom. Yeah. I mean, you know me. You know my passion for this. Every primary storyline of that television show was a Wally West storyline given to Barry Allen, and they ruined all of it. So I just couldn't do it anymore.
Wally West is super cool in that show. He's African American, which makes him automatically cool.
I mean, that's a fact.
You're gonna get in trouble for this.
That's not trouble. That's
okay.
I mean,
sorry, I enjoy the company of other races. Racist.
Unlike Will Starling, who's hanging out in Lily White Fraser Crane's apartment.
Yeah.
Fraser even have any ethnic friends?
Do you want me to eat popcorn live on the show?
I mean, it wouldn't be a first. I could mute you if I was so inclined.
Don't do that.
Well, if you're going to eat popcorn, I might have to.
I was going to say, before anybody else could say it, Jeff DeRay, unfortunately, on this episode of the show, is the alternate Jeff.
Yeah, see, I was going to say that I always thought you were just inviting Jeff W. instead, but...
Yeah.
Jeff W. Well, we're here with our pal Jeff Winstead because we are celebrating the fact that there are now 6 issues of his comic book series, The Alternate, and we've talked to you about The Alternate before, Jeff, but I always think it's a great time to, one, give an overview of what the series is. Before you even do that, tell people where they can find it, and I guess they can find it in more places than they were able to up until recently. Right?
Yeah, so you can always find it at Comixology, which is the main digital platform for digital comics. Now you can find it on Amazon for your Kindle. So you can go straight to Amazon, just in the search field, type in The Alternate Jeff Winstead, it'll come right up.
I didn't know that Amazon owned Comixology.
They do, but they don't integrate the platforms for some reason.
Oh, okay.
So if you buy a comic via Kindle and you happen to have the Comixology app, you can read it in Comixology for sure.
Got it. Okay.
But, for some people who may not want to sign up with a new service, if you already have Amazon, you can just get it that way. If you go to Comixology, though, you can get the first issue right now for 99 cents until June the 4th as part of a promotional sale they're doing.
And but it's on Amazon now as a promotional sale. And you said it's going to be as a part of Comixology Unlimited, right?
Yeah. I just hooked it up with that. So starting June 2nd. So, sometime in the near future.
Before we even get to the comic itself, just because I'm curious about the way that this part of the business works.
Yeah.
How does it work that you have a comic book, and we'll get into the creation of it, but once you have it, how do you say like, hey, Comixology, you want to put this up and charge people $1.99 for it, or how do you approach them? What happens?
They make it real simple. So not long after they launched, they started a program they call Submit. And so it's for independent creators. If you don't have a publisher, a big name publisher, you just go through them. You literally submit the book. They check it for, mostly it's quality control. Like they're not really doing, they're not picking and choosing which project. So they'll take whatever you can give them, as long as you can put the files up right. And it looks
right,
good.
and they just make sure it's not like thinly veiled hate speech or something.
Exactly. I mean, the big thing is like humorously, the one thing they cared about was the lettering. I guess because so many amateur comics do lettering so poorly. So as long as they think the lettering's well done, they just put it up.
Right. They use what they call the very strict Tom Wojciechowski scale, and if it's at least comparable to his, then it's like, all right, we'll use it.
Well, sure, that's a heck of a scale.
Yeah. And by the way, nothing like some good comic book letterer joking around. That's what people come to the Bladtcast for.
Yeah, we go on John Workman, but yeah, you can go Wojciechowski. That's fine.
He's the one I always used to because, and people, it's, believe it or not, this is like the 5th time he's come up on the podcast. It's because he's the guy who did the lettering for Uncanny X-Men. And when you have to do the lettering for Chris Claremont, you have to learn how to write like incredibly small because of the amount of dialogue per page.
Yeah. And over the decades, smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And humorously enough, when I first got on Facebook years ago, I sent him a friend request and he accepted it. And I said, hey, man, thanks a lot. I always loved your work. And I just jokingly, I said, I really admire, like in the early 90s, how you managed to letter stuff from Claremont. And he said, oh, it wasn't Claremont's fault. It was Jim Lee's fault. Jim Lee wasn't drawing enough story. He was doing too many splash pages, and therefore Claremont had to write all this prose to explain what was happening in the story.
No, most things were Jim Lee's fault, also like
they still are. Honestly,
yeah.
COVID, I think we could just blame this whole quarantine situation on Jim Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably right.
Yeah.
I mean, don't skewer me for this, but that's Stan Lee's like shitty brother or something.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was sort of a bad Asian joke, frankly, because
I remember when I invented Jim Lee. I saw Batman climbing on the hush, and I thought to myself that there should be a wild storm, something involved. Who knows? It's the 70s. I'm drunk.
So that's how you submit it, and a lot of the stuff is obviously done digitally now. Did you do the lettering yourself digitally, or did you have a proper letterer?
Yeah, I do it myself, but it's digital. So there are a couple companies that make really good comic book fonts. They actually, Marvel and DC uses the same fonts. They just make them commercially available.
Right.
So I think the one I'm using now, the first one, the one I'm using now comes from Comicraft. And I'm switching to another one that's made by Blambot. So it's just like different, just the names of these guys some of these guys have been doing it for years. They actually transitioned from traditional lettering where you did it right on the board to digital. And so they'll make fonts for like Dave Gibbons and his hand style.
Yeah.
If Dave Gibbons wants to letter his own book in his own hand style, they'll make that for him.
So these guys did it by hand, and then they just translated those into a computer, into like a font, basically.
Yes, it's literally a font, and not to get too wonky, but font technology has improved so much. Like used to be when you would get a book like in the late 90s, they were transitioning from hand lettering to digital, and you could always tell because all the S's look the same. So you kind of look, the S or the A's or whatever. And now the font technology is such that they can program it to every other A is a different type of A.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more sophisticated, which is pretty cool.
Interesting.
But yeah, the real art now is in placing the balloons. So you obviously want the balloons to read properly left to right and all that. So that takes some, depending on how good of an artist you're working with, and I've been lucky to work with good guys, it takes some skill.
Because you're literally placing them over the artwork itself, right?
Yeah. And especially if you're not doing the artwork, which I don't on this, you feel bad about covering people's art.
Right.
So they have the script to start with. So I write in a full script, style. So it's has a panel description and then all the dialogue that I plan to insert. So they know roughly how much room to leave, but sometimes they misjudge, or rare occasion I might want to add something. Usually I end up deleting, because what happens is when you see the art, you realize, oh, they've already done this for me. So you just take stuff out, So.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting to know that you're able to obviously make those kind of adjustments, because it's all digital. It's inserted in there. So doing the alternate is not your day job. Your day job includes working for companies like Lone Rider Beer.
Yeah.
And this is one of my last 2 cans.
I was going to say, how long ago have you had these beers?
Oh, a long time.
Every time we do a Bladtcast, you keep drinking beers that Jeff gave you. And I'm like, how many fucking beers?
That's not true, because the last time I drank Yinglings and he didn't give me those.
That's true.
No, but I admired that, because I hadn't had a Yingling in years, because they did sell in North Carolina. But
yeah. So anyway, oh yeah, and that's right. These are the 2 that I have left, because they're the hoppy ones, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I still have it. But it's all right.
Yeah.
Give them to me.
Hey, it's
those will keep longer.
Yeah, it's Monday night. It's time to drink. It's fine.
Is it Monday night though?
Tuesday.
Might as well be. Yeah.
For all intents and purposes. Yeah.
TTIT tits.
It's also, in my mind, it's still March, because just the rest of our lives is March 2020.
I just decided we all get a do-over. So I'm supposed to be turning 33 this year, but I'm just going to dial it back. I'll turn 33 in 2021.
Yeah, I heard you explain that in the last episode. It was a disruption in your timeline.
Exactly. This is a weird. Exactly. Yeah.
So, all right. So this is it's a side project. Something that you started doing for fun, and your side piece. This isn't your first love. So, how does the idea come to you, and when are you convinced, like, what, I am going to really do this? Instead of, there's plenty of ideas that I've had in my life that I obviously, Sammy, there's another thing I'm never going to do. But so where does the idea come from, and when do you realize I'm actually going to do this?
Well, the idea is, so, if you want to wade into the superhero, like, a lot of indie comics don't do superheroes because why bother? Because Marvel and DC has that covered. It's very hard to sell people on the idea of a superhero they don't recognize, which is why even when Marvel and DC launch a book with a new character, it usually flops after 2 years.
Well, especially when it's a great character like Speedball,
Listen, Speedball isn't that bad of a character. But anyway, that's a different.
Well, Jeff, I'm sorry we're out of time. It was nice of you to be on the show.
But so essentially, though, what sort of happened. So I got into comics reading Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was one of the first things I loved. And I loved that concept of the alternate realities. And over time, DC in particular stopped touching that stuff at all. They spent almost 20 years where they didn't do that. They had one main universe.
Right. That was the whole point of Crisis on Infinite Earths. This is me actually asking, because I haven't, as we've established, I haven't read it, even though you were kind enough to give me a trade paperback, and I will read it.
What?
We'll talk about it on the show at some point.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so, but the whole point of it was they felt like they had too many alternate realities, and they wanted to kind of streamline the storytelling, right? I mean, that's like a behind the scenes decision, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So it was the basic idea was to make it a more user-friendly universe for new readers, which is more or less worked for me. Like, it happened right when I was getting into comics, and they were relaunching Superman with John Byrne and all that stuff. It was exactly at the moment I got into comics, so it worked out perfectly in that sense. But over time, I started to miss those kind of stories, and I just started to think about, if I were to do a comic, what are the, how would I want to do it? And so that was one thing I wanted to do. Another thing was comic books. I actually wrote the first issue of the Alter like in 2002. And
that I don't think I realized that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's pretty old. So
and wait, at what point? And unless I'm mistaken, it was new on Comixology in like 2015, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe even older. I'm not sure. It's been we're getting close to like a year.
Well, no, because I remember how we met was online. You
Correct.
messaged me about it, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what Comixology is, and I didn't write back to you. And then months later, I was going through, and I'm like, oh yeah, that guy, like, and it was like around the time my son was born, and that was a big reason why I did not follow up with you, was because I wasn't following up with anyone.
And because who's this weirdo who's just messaging me randomly?
Although I think it was because on Facebook I was just trying to stir up trouble, and I talked about how Secret Wars is so much better than Crisis on Infinite Earths, despite the fact that I never read Crisis. I just was being a dick, basically.
Yeah. You were on Twitter, and I actually happened to be in the grocery when I saw you tweet that. And I don't know that I'd been following you on Twitter, but hadn't engaged you, because I was a bridge too far.
You were stalking me, thanks to the Dennis Miller show.
Yeah, I literally put the ice cream back into the freezer, stopped in the middle of an aisle, and say, I got to put this guy right. So yeah, that was essentially that.
And look, objectively, Secret Wars didn't really impact anything other than it gave Spider-Man a black costume. But Crisis is like a super pivotal moment, and like you said, it defined their universe, their singular universe, for like 20 years. Secret Wars, Colossus broke up with Kitty Pryde, and Spider-Man got a black costume. That's really, like, it didn't really change anything. It was like status quo, like the month after all the heroes went back to Earth. So
if it was supposed to change everything, the war wouldn't be secret. It would be more public.
That's actually a very good point. Yeah.
And to paraphrase Guns N' Roses, what's so secret about wars anyway? But back to Jeff Winstead. So 2002, you write the first issue.
Right.
And this is just written, right? You didn't draw any of it. You didn't do any sketches.
Yeah, the original idea was I was going to draw it. And so the other idea I had was, so at the time and even now, a lot of comics were doing this like decompressed storytelling. And so it sort of became a lost art. So what you would do is you would read a book and you read it in like 10 minutes, and it felt like they were writing for trade paperbacks. So when trade paperbacks got really important in the book market, so Barnes and Noble in the sort of early days of Amazon, they would do every storyline with 6 issues because they could easily fit that amount into a trade paperback.
That's so funny. I never really thought of it in that context, but I remember like, obviously this is like me in like the early 2000s, late 90s, like going to Barnes and Noble, seeing these things. I'm like, whoa, cool. Like I've been collecting comics since I was a kid, but like it was easy to collect trade paperbacks because they were like at least 6 issues, full storyline. Exactly. Yeah.
And it's a great thing, for newer readers or for people who, wait for the trades, who's going to read a full storyline in one go. The problem was, and this writer named Brian Michael Bendis is like the epitome of this. Like he's a really good writer, but his stuff is very decompressed. So you'll read, like he was writing Daredevil at the time. So you read an issue of Daredevil, it takes you 5 minutes, and literally it should have been in an old comic book from the 80s, 3 pages.
Yeah.
Right, and just to sort of extend that time period, the standalone Spider-Man book that Todd McFarlane did, which I still contend that Spider-Man #1 is one of the worst comic books I've ever read because literally nothing happens in it. You want to talk about a guy who was just doing a bunch of splash pages? I think I read it in 3 minutes. It was just, literally nothing happens. And I think if you collect those first 2 stories, not much happens, but a little bit happens.
A little bit more happens.
And I mean, I think that's very much the case. And look, there's obviously there's exceptions. It's like you take a great 6-part story like Kraven's Last Hunt, something like that, or if you go back further, like a Dark Phoenix, something that happened over a set number of issues. But yeah, when you were writing for the trade paperback, I feel like it lost something. What's great about something like Dark Phoenix or the Amazing Spider-Man, like the Gang War or the original Hobgoblin, it's part of like sort of like a 50-issue arc, just like, well, here's a little portion of it.
Yeah.
But it's like you're just writing like these 6 issues, and it's like, then the next one after that'll be a different 6-issue.
Well, even Jim Lee, like we're making jokes about Jim Lee, like it's kind of the same thing. 2006, I think, was Hush, and it was like it was just sold on the fact that like Jim Lee was like doing this art, and all the covers were amazing, and the interior art was cool, but it was like you were mostly sold on Jim Lee doing the art for Hush, and like the story was fine. But it became this like legendary Batman story where I was like, I've read a lot of better Batman stories. It turns out that it's just like this shitty kid that was Bruce's friend as a little kid who like hates him 12 issues later. I was like, what a waste of time. And then they did like Man of Tomorrow or whatever the Jim Lee, Jeff Loeb Superman story was. It was like such a wash.
Oh yeah,
I don't know.
That's interesting because that's essentially like the original plan for Mr. Sinister was that he was friends with Cyclops when they were both kids in the orphanage, and that's why he has a dumb name like Mr. Sinister, because he's like a 12-year-old boy's like embodiment of it. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think that look, the comic book market in the early 90s basically killed the comic book market forever. You know, I mean, it still exists, sure, but you know, everything was being written for, well, how can we make the hardcore collectors buy, 8 copies of this? You know, and I mean, they still do variant covers and but I mean, that was the holograms and the foil covers and the bagged with the card inside and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
And then also it's like, but what if we can get them to buy these 6 issues, but then buy them again as a trade paperback because they look nicer on the bookshelf, you know?
Yeah, and then what happens is so you go from the 90s where the books are very artist driven with the image boom and Jim Lee, Tom McFarlane, Rob Liefeld. But when you hit the 2000s, the books become writer driven.
Right.
So what you end up with is Brian Michael Bendis, Jeff Johns, a little bit later than that. And so
Brian Azzarello too,
yeah, these guys who have, some of them have screenwriting backgrounds, and that's fine. They're all very good writers, but again, you end up with this style that is a little more expanded. And so like Craven's Last Hunt's a good example where, that's a 6-issue story, but each issue sort of has a beginning, middle, and end within itself.
Yeah.
And that stopped happening for a while. So anyway, for the alternate, I thought it'd be interesting to sort of try to do what hadn't been done for about 10 years, which is to make a satisfying read each issue, but also have the story continue.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
so that was a real goal of mine. So I wanted each, I didn't want each issue to be a snack. I wanted it to be a meal that's, part of a, larger, day's worth of dining, to make it a bad analogy. It's continue bad analogy.
But only available curbside in the
exactly.
Yeah.
You can't actually dine in. Yeah.
And originally I was going to draw it, and it just became easier to write it. So I tried to do. I actually drew the first 12 pages and kept writing issue 2, wrote issue 3.
Now, just because I haven't written in a while,
Sure.
Are the first 12 pages of the finished version what you drew, or did somebody?
No,
okay.
Nothing in the book I drew except for I drew the covers for 2 through 6.
Right.
And that's a sort of a bit of a different story. So what ultimately ends up happening is I eventually thought I'd get around to drawing it. I found a publisher who accepted it based on my pitch with the 12 pages I had done and the 3 issues of scripts. And we just decided, I basically told him, I'm not going to draw this. This is just like proof of concept material.
Right, sure.
So once I had a publishing deal, I went looking for artists. And literally, I just would be on the internet and I'd find guys that I would like, and I'd just reach out to people. And shockingly, like almost everyone I reached out to was somewhat interested. And what would happen is, I wasn't shooting for Jim Lee's, of course. I was looking for people who, had a pedigree, and I could see some of their work, but maybe hadn't quite made it. I knew exactly what my target was.
Right. So you weren't reaching out for Rob Liefeld because you wanted your characters to have feet?
Well, that was also a bonus.
That's
yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So I ended up finding this guy in Spain, Daniel Geet, who did the first 12 pages.
Right.
And I thought, that's great. So what I wanted to do is I wanted the book to have a Wizard of Oz concept. So I know we haven't talked about what the book's about, but basically it's a character who goes from one reality to another. So from one Earth to a different reality to a different one. And I thought, much like Dorothy, wouldn't it be cool if he gets to another Earth and the art style is different to sort of reflect that?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I got a different guy, contacted him. I really liked his work. He had worked on an independent book called The Black Coat that I liked. And he wasn't interested at first. I said, let me show you the script. Just read it first and see what you think. And so he read the script, loved it, and said, okay, I'll do these 12 pages in issue 1, but I'm not sure I'll come back for issue 2. I said, that's okay, we'll worry about that later.
All right, that's
so,
fair.
As it happened, he didn't come back for issue 2 because he got better paying work, which means that work that paid like something.
Right.
And so the whole Wizard of Oz concept kind of went out the window.
So he didn't want to be paid in Lone Star beer.
Exactly. So long story short is you can evidence by the fact that the book's only digital. The publishing deal fell through for reasons sort of based on the way comic books are distributed. The distributor changed the minimums for what a single issue comic had to sell. There was no way that an independent comic was going to hit, an independent comic at my level was going to hit that.
Right.
And the publisher just said, oh, maybe we'll do like a 3-issue collection. And I didn't want to do that at the time. So we just kind of parted ways. And so that's when I went to Comixology at that point.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens in sort of the decade plus, though, that, you know, you first write it? So at what point do you reach out to these other artists? Does that process really take that long, or did you put it on the back burner for a while?
No, it was back burner. So my wife, Rachel, and I were living in Savannah at the time. I got a new job in North Carolina. We moved up there. And what really happened was I worked for a gift wrap company in the art department, and they were bought by a larger company. They shut us down. So I was unemployed.
Right.
And so once I was unemployed, I thought, hey, now's a good time to try this comic book thing, see if there's anything I can make happen. And, you know, I was able to kind of get it off the ground, but then when the publishing deal fell through, that was a big disappointment. And but I was still able to find artists and so slowly able to pull it along. But when the reason I stopped wanting to draw it was I thought it'd be interesting to see if I could jumpstart a career as a writer. So I started having this side job as an artist for a lone writer and whatnot, but sort of transitioning to being a writer, which I find writing much easier. Like art's a little bit more of a struggle, whereas writing seems very natural.
I will say though, because like I knew that we were going to podcast about this, and you had sent me a message maybe 2 months ago, kind of when the quarantine first started happening, like, hey, there's like a sale if you want to use this code, like it'll get like, and so like I was like, you know, I'm gonna buy all 6 issues at once. And I read in that day like issues 1 through 4, and then I was working and I kind of like it just fell away, like a lot, like I was just didn't keep up with it. And then Christian said like, let's podcast for Jeff's book, and I was like, cool, so let me finish it out the day that we're going to read it so it's fresh in my mind. And I read 5 and 6 today, and the cover for 5, like I'm a sucker for cover art, and I know that like writing is your forte, but I honestly was like looking at the cover for 5 and it's like, I have to tell Jeff that this is like one of my favorite covers ever. It's just
cool. Well, thanks.
I thought it was so cool. I love that old pulp art style and the way that you did it, and just like in reading the notes on the inside of the cover pages of like who did the art wear, and like you did certain covers here and there and then certain art here and there. I was like, always kind of wanted to keep in mind like what was your work. Everybody did a good job, and it was pretty fluid because sometimes it's weird in a comic, even like DC or Marvel publishes a book and it's like the artist changes on certain pages and you turn the page and you're like, what the fuck? Like it's like so different.
Yeah.
But even though the artist was changing kind of in and out for these first 6 issues, it still had like a fluidity to it, which was really nice. And I thought that your work on the covers was really good. I'm just singing your praises, you know.
Oh, thanks. No, so that covered, not to bounce around too much, but issue 5 is like a detective story.
Exactly.
So it's essentially, it's a continuing plot line, but I get to focus on one character who's like the team detective. And so I think that's a great time to sort of experiment with the pulp cover style.
It was very well done.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about the story in and of itself and how it does deal with these alternate realities, and that is the title, The Alternate. You've got the one we start with, he's just Metal, not Metal Man, or do I have them reversed?
No, the one we start with is Metal, M-E-T-T-L-E.
But he's the only superhero or superpowered person in his reality, right?
Correct.
And he's, you know, as the only superpowered person, if Jeff DeRay was the only superpowered person in reality, I believe that he would live somewhere that's pimped out, and he would have a parade of ladies in and out, and he'd be an international superstar. Don't you think, Jeff DeRay?
I feel like I'd be a super villain. Just being honest.
No, you'd be Dr. Doom, I think.
Hey, look. Nationalism, as long as it's for some weird European nation, it's cool, right?
Yeah, as long as it's for a made-up nation. Yes, exactly.
The problem with being a villain is people don't love you. See, this guy Metal, James Conrad, he wants people to love him.
Right.
So it's much more easier to do that by being a Hollywood action hero. So that's why he goes that route.
And so he, of course, is he finds himself in another reality where. Well, I guess I should let you explain your comic book, shouldn't I?
No, I love it because if you understand it, that means it's working. But yeah, he finds himself eventually on his world. There's an alien invasion.
Yeah.
And through that, he gets sent to an alternate reality. And so yeah, once he gets there, he discovers there are a lot of other superheroes and villains. And it's much more like a Marvel DC universe. Yeah. But there's also another version of him who is like a much more like altruistic,
right,
a smarter,
Superman version.
Yeah, he's like a much stronger version. Like basically, he is like George Reeves Superman, and then he goes to an alternate reality, and that Superman is, you know, I don't even know if we have like an accurate.
I don't know if there's a.
Yeah, because it's not Henry Cavill. That's the problem. I was
there's too many Supermans.
No, you were there. George Reeves, Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love Christopher Reeve's the gold standard for me.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of power levels.
But the power level.
Miller's Russian hat-wearing Batman in Red Sun. That's not Frank Miller. Is that Frank Miller?
No, anyway. That's Mark
Miller. Thank you. Yeah.
There's and Dave Johnson on the art. Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
So anyway, but there's I'm sorry, what, Jeff?
I said a lot of nepotism in this.
Yeah, a lot of Millers.
That's right. Yeah.
A lot of Millers.
All the Millers and Lees.
But the that was kind of the thing that really that I found fascinating is this, for all intents and purposes, this much better version of him that exists, which to me is like kind of the, you know, there's a lot of interesting things and other characters in there, but the fact that he goes and he's like, oh wait, I'm the super lame version of this guy, you know?
Yeah.
See, when I reread the whole thing again today because I had time, and
you read it a while back too.
All right, well, let's everybody kiss out to Jeff Winstead. God.
Look, we all love it. It's great. I love that Jeff DeRay reread it because you read it a while ago, right? Just I don't even think I knew you read it. You just you took it upon yourself to read it, right, Jeff DeRay?
We had like talked about it, and I knew it was on this platform, and I think it was like something where I got an email because I think it was something to do with Amazon purchasing Comixology or some promotion thereof. Because my account is through the Amazon account, right? So
yeah, mine too.
I'm sure for whatever reason I connected it that way, and then I was just like, I don't know. I just remember it was sometime like over a year ago or about a year ago, and I just bought the first 5 and just sat and read through them all just because I had time. Like
Bladtcast listener
Jennifer Yard, yes, she's a big alternate fan. Yeah.
Yeah, she had read it all recently and she was tweeting about it, and somehow Jeff ended up on the thread. And this thing I know, I was about to reach out to Jeff to give him a code, and all of a sudden Jeff said, "Oh, I just bought the first 5, and I'm in the middle of issue 3 or whatever." Like, really? That's super nice of you.
True.
So I really appreciate that. So yeah, it was cool.
It's totally worth it.
We're gonna spell Jeff DeRay's name now Jeffe.
Jeffy.
And then and that's the metal version of Jeff.
Why do I have to be the shitty version of myself?
No. Wait. and then Metal Man is the Jeff Winstead, but obviously
but the one with the dash, so he's evil.
But because you're spelled Jeffe, we can also call you codename Jefe.
Jefe.
Yeah.
El Jefe.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, look, and Jeff DeRay, that's cool that you took it upon yourself to read it. But what did you think, kind of rereading it and being able to read it in one setting? I mean, that's the problem, is that, you know, you've read it, been able to read it over different. I mean, yeah, what is it, like 5 years basically? And just some of your overall, like, what spoke to you the most about it rereading it this time? Like, I liked the notion of our hero being the lame version of Metal Man.
Well, first I'd say it was
lame.
Lame.
I don't think he's lame.
Yeah,
but first I would say one thing I thought was really cool is the first time I read it on my phone, and
interesting.
And the way it does the panels is actually really interesting. It cuts from the parts of the page to each like part of the panel, so it's like it plays out the comic for you.
It just did that on your phone, or you mean it does it Okay.
On the phone, on the app, on the phone.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And then today I read it on the computer, so the whole page would pop up, and it was just like, I was like, this is less fun, because before it was like playing it out for me.
I think I read it initially on an iPad, and then reading on a computer, it is less fun. I like when it moves.
It made it feel more dynamic, but it was still obviously enjoyable. It was just interesting how that did change the experience. I think it's really cool that it makes it like a better experience to consume it on the go, because to me that would encourage me to get more and read more things versus feeling like I have to sit at my computer to read anything.
Will mentioned that he was reading it that way too, and I thought, that's an interesting way to have to read it on a laptop, because I've done the phone and iPad, and with the phone, and so originally I had an iPad mini.
I remember when comic books were on paper.
Exactly.
You used to flip the page, and you might get a paper cut if the splash page was too big.
I usually I don't subscribe to anything digitally for comics. Before the quarantine, I was like, I'm still like a paper comic guy. I go to my comic shop every week. So like I tried to zoom in on my laptop screen to make it as big as I could to read it as it could be almost organically, like 2 pages. I had to, 2-finger scroll a little bit, but like I could kind of emulate it a little bit. So it's not, exactly. I had to 2-finger scroll it. But it actually wasn't that bad. On my phone, it would have been a pain in the ass, because my phone is the screen is this big. And
in all honesty, I would say that it was the fact that reading the alternate and the fact that it was only available digitally, it made me more comfortable with reading things digitally, because I still prefer to have printed comics, but I've certainly read a lot of things and I'm more comfortable with it because I had to read things this way. And I'm like, this is actually kind of cool. And I do like the idea that if you have something like Marvel Unlimited, which I do have, it's, they don't have everything, but there's a lot of stuff. It's just like, let me just read this thing that I actually would not have paid for,
right?
This specific limited series, that sort of a thing. So
and to Jeff's point, when you're reading on the phone, you can set it up to this. It does a thing called guided view. Literally just go from one panel to the next, is what Jeff was talking about. And so particularly if you're reading something like an older comic, or even something like Watchmen, which is a 9-panel grid, it's really cool because it's just like the same panel size over and over and over and over. So it really goes quickly, and it's really fluid, and it gives a lot of motion.
So
I also wanted to say the point I keep forgetting to get to, which was, I thought it was really interesting because even though I knew what was going to happen this time, it felt less like when you got to the alternate reality, my impressions or my assumptions were less that he was the lame version of this guy, and more that this other guy had more secrets going on because of how aloof he was right off the bat. It reminded me more of, I can't remember his name for whatever reason, but the bad Superman from The Boys, that Amazon show. It's a Homelander. He kind of almost reminds you of like, is he going to be another Homelander? Like, he's too aloof to be trustworthy, and then you find out he's just like, this is fucking with me. What the hell is this guy doing here?
So you get the first issue up, and I don't know if when I first talked to you, if you had more than one issue up. Like, what's the space between getting the second and subsequent issues up?
I feel like by the time we had talked on the Bladtcast, that there were 4 up. Because
I didn't get to it right away, but somewhere in the back of my mind, maybe we commented on something, and then I'm like, that was the guy who wrote to me, because I think I read a few of them at once. But between getting the first issue up, how long before you get issue 2 up? And what's that process of getting issue 2 finished?
Right. So what happened is, because I had 3 scripts and I thought I had this publishing deal, I was finding artists for all 3 issues at the same time. So once I realized the first 2 guys weren't going to stay, I started immediately looking for other artists. So I had art going for 3 issues at once at one point. And so once the book went to Comixology, the first time you ever submit a book, it takes forever. I think it was a 5-month process before the first issue went live. But then after that, like this newest one, it was a month. I submitted it, 2 days later, they approved it, and they put it up.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love the idea that it can be so fast, because the lead time that you needed, I'm thinking more back in the day than right now, from, when they finished it, when it went to the printer and all that, you really couldn't make a change, it was like really, you had to be months ahead of time.
Yeah. And also now, I mean, you couldn't do this without computers because, I got the guy who did issue, I guess he did part of issue 2. Issue 2 is the weirdest issue in terms of like going back and forth among different artists. And I tried to explain it in the story, like, oh, Metal has this concussion. And because he has a concussion, everything looks right. I actually added that dialogue because this is way too much.
Right.
But we just have to work with it at this point. But yeah, so the guy, Graychuck, who did issues 4, 5, and the first part of issue 6, he's in Canada. The guy who did issue 3 is in Finland. My colorist is in Brazil. So it's pretty interesting.
How do you just so Comixology helps you outsource to these people, or like how do you find?
No, they don't care about any of that stuff.
Got it. They want a finished product and that's it. That's all they
exactly.
Okay.
So I find guys, like the colorist was more of a, like literally like going on a site that you like put out want ads for people.
Yeah.
The artist I always
wanted comic book artist.
Exactly.
And colorist and
the artist
letterist.
I always would lurk, and I'd find a guy who was drawing something that was a little above what I could probably get, and I'd reach out to those people.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And so issue 3, like I said, consistent artist. The guy's name is Sami Kavela. He's from Finland. He's got a real comic booky style, and I thought it was really good for that issue because it's the most like superhero-y book because like they have the villains, they're playing that poker game that they're trying to break up.
Right.
So that was a cool experience. But so yeah, eventually it was you get these first 3 issues done, and then it's like, well, who's the artist now? See, so I had to go back and find other people to do the other issues. But the nice thing was with issue 6, I actually got back in touch with the guy who did the first half of issue 1. And I said, hey, I have this epilogue in this newest issue. Would you have any interest in drawing it? So it's like sort of brings the whole thing full circle in a way if you're reading all the issues at once. Like same guy who started it is the guy who finishes it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and before we get to the sort of the issue 6, there's some interesting inclusions of characters. You're talking about the Wizard of Oz aspect to it, and at some point we get characters that aren't characters that we know from the Wizard of Oz movie, but they're from the L. Frank Baum universe. They're basically the Pumpkinhead guy, and I actually have no idea what that guy's name is, but
Jack.
Yeah. So, but you have him.
Just think Nightmare Before Christmas. Jack.
Right. And it's
Jack O'Lantern.
Jack O'Lantern. Yeah. But it's basically, though I guess a lot of that ended up public domain or something, right? Yeah. I mean, that's how you're able to use them, right?
Right. So he's from the novels.
Yeah.
So the character. I just kind of took the character and I steampunked him up a little bit. So I sort of made him more of like a son, sort of like he's sort of combining this idea of he's this fantasy character who's also this scientist. So that's why you have him like sort of doing things like examining the portal that metal came through, working with the government to figure out like how to reverse engineer that. So he's public domain. So anybody that wants to use that character can use him. And the thing with the characters,
good.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And I was gonna say he's from an alternate universe.
That's right.
And just steal everything.
Screw you guys! I'm starting my alternative comic.
We're starting the alternative Bladtcast. It's called the Cat Blast.
Oh, the Cat Blast!
Cat Blast Fever.
No. I've already written TM next to that, so I think. So when I first started the book and I was like populating the team, originally I thought, well, I'll just make like analogies of the Avengers and the Justice League.
Sure.
And what happened is I went about it. I was kind of bored with that idea because I thought it was just too one note. And so what ended up happening is that really the only character in the book that is a direct correlation to a Marvel or DC character is Metal Man, who's obviously sort of a Superman stand-in.
Sure.
Right.
But I needed that for the reader as a shorthand to understand what I'm saying this guy is. Like, this is the pinnacle this guy's on. And so when Metal enters this universe, you understand it right off the bat because this guy has a cape and he wears his underwear on the outside. And this is what he's living up to, is this Superman level of standard. So the other characters are, just came from different places that weren't as inspired by Marvel and DC stuff. This was how I ended up with the Pumpkinhead guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then the most recent issue, sort of in the epilogue portion, you have some very recognizable characters. At least I thought.
Blue Beetle.
Yeah, Blue Beetle. And I know that when we had you on Marvel Movie News,
turn
we
into
talked.
that gun. Blue
I know that
Beetle's
when we had you on Marvel Movie News, we talked a little bit about this, but for the Bladtcast audience, kind of talk about who those characters are and the surprising fact that they're actually public domain.
Yeah, so I have two characters that the names of which, if you're a Marvel fan or a DC fan, you'll recognize, which is Blue Beetle and Wonder Man.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about these characters, though, the original versions of those characters, which in Wonder Man's case has nothing at all to do with Marvel's version, are public domain characters. So they were characters created in the 40s that when the companies went out of business, no one renewed the rights. And the way copyright worked at the time, you get to jump through a lot of hoops to maintain the copyright. And nobody bothered, so they fell into public domain. There are hundreds of lame superheroes like this. Some are cool, some aren't so cool. One of the more popular ones is a character called Black Terror, and so several publishers like Dynamite does a book on and off, and
Dynamite does some good stuff.
Well, this reminds me that Jeff DeRay, Will, and myself, we need to make sure that we renew the copyright on the Mediocre, our personal take of the Joker, because we don't want that to fall. Ha ha.
We might work that to alternate.
Yeah, he's an alternate Joker.
You should get the Mediocre in there all the way.
Yeah.
We'll take our
for issue 9 maybe.
We'll take our percentage once that releases.
But Blue Beetle is not. I don't know. Are there multiple Blue Beetles? I guess.
Yeah. So Blue Beetle in particular was created in 1940.
Right.
Very popular character for the time. He had his own radio show. Had a long-running comic.
No, this wasn't the Ted Kord Blue Beetle. This was another version of Blue Beetle.
So this Blue Beetle was a guy named Dan Garrett.
Okay.
Who got his powers through a vitamin called X2 that this scientist made for him. So he was a cop. He was an Irish cop by day and a superhero by night.
Oh, you know
all
what?
Right, move along. Nothing to see here. All right, move it along.
When I take me vitamins, I become the fucking Blue Beetle. Everybody knows that.
Right.
See, I thought the Blue Beetle was Pete Best.
What?
Totally
say that again, Jeff DeRay, because I like that a lot.
I said I thought the Blue Beetle was Pete Best.
Nah.
So this Blue Beetle
fades away by the Beetle. And what happens is a company called Charlton starts. Yeah, Habikai, exactly. So a company called Charlton starts using that character, but they tweak the origin. So now, instead of having a vitamin, he's an archaeologist who finds a scarab in an Egyptian tomb that gives him supernatural powers.
Wait a minute, that sounds like Moon Knight.
It does sound like Moon Knight, but it's
like
not
suspiciously like Moon Knight.
Well, DC folded in a lot of their characters from Charlton or whatever it's called.
Charlton.
Charlton. Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Now you have to understand all this public domain stuff fascinates me. I'm super into it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and by the way, this is of particular interest to our friend Jason Blair, who does intellectual property and copyright law. And I think he'll have been bored up until this point. No offense to you and your project, but now that you're talking about public domain and copyright law, he's probably writing a 6,000 word response for us to read on the next.
He's writing issue 7 of the alternate.
Yes,
as
that's
we
true.
Speak. Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear what he says about all this. So what ends up happening? So Charlton is this version of the character who has different powers. Eventually, Steve Ditko leaves Marvel, goes to Charlton.
I remember when Steve Ditko left Marvel. I said, "Steve, what are you doing?" And he said, "Stan, I hate you."
He said nothing because he was an objectivist and he thought Stan should just know because he would just know. But that's a different story. So anyway, so he goes to Charlton. Dick Giordano is the editor at the time. Dick Giordano has this concept of having a bunch of heroes he calls the action hero line, none of which has superpowers except for Captain Atom, who's a character that Steve Ditko created in his first go-round at Charlton in 1961. So back to Blue Beetle. So Blue Beetle becomes Ted Kord, who is a guy who doesn't have any superpowers, but he has a flying bug, and he knows gymnastics, and he has all this technology that he uses to fight crime because he made a promise.
I love that he knows gymnastics. He's like, hold on, let me do the somersault so that I can kick you.
The pommel horse, Christian.
I thought it was the rhythmic twirling of the ribbon that he uses to distract his enemies.
Which, in a fun way, is honestly just Alan Moore making Owlman. With the same craft, the owl plane and everything.
Yeah, if you want me to get into all that,
Artemis.
To be real
talk about that.
So what happens is Charlton goes out of business in the late 60s.
Charlton not in charge.
Exactly. Dick Giordano, who was the editor of those books, goes to DC Comics. In the mid 80s, Paul Levis, who's the president of DC Comics, purchases the Charlton characters as a gift for Dick Giordano to use in the DC universe. So those characters are integrated into the DC universe with Crisis. So the first time you read Crisis #1, you'll see the Blue Beetle. That's his first DC appearance.
Really? Now, that late? I thought
that late.
Was like old school. Okay.
No, it's like 1985. So the character really hadn't been seen, for the most part, since the late 60s at that point.
Yeah.
So what will be of interest to Jeff is, Jason Blair. Technically, Jeff Duray has no.
Look, everyone we know, their name might as well be Jeff. It's just easier.
Excuse me. No. This is how we distinguish between the two of them. It's Hefe and Jeff.
Right.
Yeah.
So for Jason Blair, is technically Charlton didn't copyright the books properly. They put the copyright notice on the wrong page. So all those characters are technically public domain. Now, good luck publishing them because DC will sue you, give you a cease and desist. You'll never get it off the ground.
Right.
So anyway, long story short, DC owns those characters, so they've been publishing those. The Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, The Question.
Yeah.
Character.
The Question's my favorite. I love The Question so much.
Oh yeah, me too. We'll talk about this off another time. But so Alan Moore pitches Watchmen with the Charlton characters.
Got it.
When DC sees the final pitch and he sees what they're going to do at the end, that basically he's killing all the characters. They say, you know what, we don't want to use the characters for this because we don't want to kill them off. We want to use them in perpetuity. So go make your own characters. So the Watchmen characters are just analogs of Rorschach's The Question, Night Owl is Blue Beetle, Ozymandias is this Charlton character named Thunderbolt, Pete Cannon Thunderbolt. Dr. Manhattan is Captain Atom, and Silk Spectre is Nocturne.
Got it.
That's how that happens.
Nocturne becomes your own character.
Oh, not Nocturne, Nightshade. Now, Nocturne is my character.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, wait a minute.
No. Yeah,
Nightshade. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, as far as trademark goes, DC does own the trademark on the Blue Beetle. So what's funny is I couldn't put on issue 6 cover guest starring the Blue Beetle.
Right.
Because DC would sue my ass off.
But you can say it in the page.
Blue Beetle all day and all night.
That's cool. I also felt like, I don't know if this is like reading too much into it, but like that, I don't even know who that character was. Because it was the tease at the end of issue 6. There was a Deathstroke vibe with the design of this character. And I was like, I don't actually know that person's name. But then another character referenced like Blue Beetle. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, oh my God, can he cross into things that he wants to? So I was very excited for issue 7.
When I sent that to Comixology, I half wondered if they were going to flag it. Like, hey,
because you had mentioned that to me sort of, off air, just back and forth, is the fact that even though these are public domain characters, Comixology might feel like, potentially this is too much of a headache.
I don't know.
They weren't sure if they were going to accept it the way that it was drawn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, in the original script, I actually didn't even call them out. I just called them the Beetle. And I thought, screw it. Let's just go in. If they want to reject it, they can reject it. I can change it later. So I just called them by name, and it flew right by. So.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the interesting thing, that heading into issue 6, I kind of felt like, oh, you have this 6-issue story to kind of go back to the idea of everything's a trade paperback, but it's completely wide open. So what are your plans and, you know, your ambitions really for issues 7 and beyond?
Yeah, Will and I were talking about this a little bit on Twitter today, and so I actually don't know. So I'd love to keep it going. I have every intention to. I know exactly what happens through issue 12, actually through issue 36. You know, more or less. Like I know issue by issue.
No, I love that you have it through issue 36.
I mean, you have to, right?
Yeah, I'm
have like a.
Look, I've read enough comics where I don't think that they knew where they were going. You know, in issue 4, much less.
Everyone's watched Lost. We all know that after the pilot, nobody knew what the fuck they were doing.
I really wish you didn't bring up Lost, because now it's going to make me angry. Because the Lost finale was like 10 years ago, just the other day.
And we won't like you when you're angry. We know.
No, it's just, you know, like the way that Lost ended, and this can somehow be relevant to comics. It ended in a way that it made me hate the entire series. It made me feel like I had wasted my time, because the whole time the creators were like, no. The idea that this would be purgatory is crazy. That sounds so stupid. Believe us. Believe me. It's not purgatory. Oh, by the way, it's purgatory. And I was like, well, fuck you, you know, for wasting my time like that. And it's made me hate the fact that it was like a brilliant show for a few years there. And then it just lost its way. So Jeff, we're saying, make sure you have it planned out.
The nice thing is when it goes so many years without getting printed, it just lives in my head. So, you know, I just keep constantly having these ideas, and I'll jot them down. And sometimes I'll tell Rachel, she says, did you write that down? I won't forget it. She says, you better write it down, because you might forget by the time you get to it.
Yeah.
You know, so
I forget so many things.
Richer because of the delay in, you know, getting the stuff out. So I'm not sure what's next. I mean, the digital thing is, I enjoy it, but I love to see the books in print.
Yeah, no, there's I believe I have a print edition of issue 1, right? You did a few of those for a Comic-Con appearance, right?
Yeah, I did a small run for up here for Palm Springs.
In Palm Springs, where you live, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I believe you're in the room I stayed in the time I visited you guys.
I am in that room. Yeah.
The leg lamp behind you. Yeah.
You still have the very uncomfortable.
The Italian fragile.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't great, but it was fine. We had a good time. I love it out there in Palm Springs. I
gotta get my charger. I'm sorry, you guys.
Oh, Will's that guy.
Right. The viewers, I have to get my charger.
All right, Will's got to go get his charger. That's all right.
When I read the epilogue,
I'm gonna put him back in the waiting room.
Yes.
I'm gonna make him wait.
When I read the epilogue, I thought of the Jet Li movie 1. And my hope is that all the metal men will fight in some weird pyramid at the end.
Oh, sweet.
Until there can only be one.
Okay, I was thinking more of like the Highlander.
It's similar. So in 1, it's Jet Li, right? Okay. And so the idea is that you have all these versions of yourself across multiple realities. And this one version has figured out how to cross dimensions, but he's going and killing all the other versions of himself, and as he goes and kills these other ones, he and the remaining ones that are alive get stronger and faster and everything else until it's just him and one other version of himself competing to be the one.
I've never seen this. That sounds awesome.
It's badass. Early 2000s Jet Li.
Well, you can give Jeff Duray a special thanks to Jeff Duray credit if you do that in issue 8 or 9. So if you're able to, like, how soon would you begin working on issue 9? Issue 7? Do you think?
I've actually mostly written issue 7, so it's essentially, it could be drawn. The problem is, like, my Canadian artist Alex Graychuck, who did the last 3 issues, he's on board. He's ready to keep working on it, but the book, let's say it's not incredibly profitable.
Sure, no, I completely understand that. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's demeaning to say at this point it's kind of a hobby. It's the way that I describe the Bladtcast. The Bladtcast is in no way a professional endeavor. I do it because I think it's fun. I like talking to the guys. I like having on other guests and stuff like that. But it's really a hobby. There is no money to be gained. I don't lose a lot of money on it, but I lose a little bit of money every single year. Just the fact that I do it, just by having the website and SoundCloud and all that stuff.
Somebody told me that, you know, you can do the alternate the rest of your life. You're never going to work for Marvel or DC, but you can make a decent living. I'd do it in a heartbeat. Like, I'd take that deal, no problem. I would love to do it. But as far as like getting the other guys involved, that's the problem by not doing it all myself. Thanks, Will.
Classic.
I'm so glad I brought him back.
Yeah.
Because obviously Will wasn't there for a minute, but now he's definitely back.
So by not doing it all myself, I feel responsible to these other guys. And even though a lot of them are on board to keep working on it, like I just feel bad.
Yeah, because those guys don't make money, right? I mean, they basically.
No. I mean, there's if the book ever made money for sure, there'd be like like a.
Is there any interest, not necessarily like obviously on your part, but have you tried to like pitch the idea of like, well, what if I put these 6 issues in a trade paperback?
Yeah, I was talking with Will on this on Twitter today. So that's my next thing. And so the problem now is the comic book industry was already in bad shape before COVID. And with COVID,
absolutely.
It's been in bad shape since 1997. Yeah.
I mean, I would say earlier than that, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just it's the oversaturation of the collectability of it, and sort of writing and drawing books specifically towards the the collector's market as opposed to the storytelling market. I mean,
right.
Jeff Winstead and I mean, we've bonded over a very specific era of Amazing Spider-Man, which is from the mid 80s, like when he first had the black costume, and then the symbiote eventually became Venom. But like the pre-Todd McFarlane era, where like it was actually about just the stories before it became more artist driven. And it's like I saw that happen in a number of books. I mean, we're talking about Todd McFarlane, we're talking about Jim Lee, where like the art kind of dictated what was happening, and editorial felt like that's what was actually bringing people to the book, and that's how Bob Harris at Marvel drives away, thanks to Jim Lee, the guy who had written X-Men for 16 years. So it's I don't know. I mean, I think you can kind of pinpoint that era. And it didn't take long for me to just, I mean, like, it wasn't even a decade that I actively read comics. I at one point, I think I read, like, it felt like everything. I was like, I'm going to get Thor. Thor? Who's reading Thor? Well, I was, I mean, long before, he was in a movie. So I think it still exists, mostly out of kind of a place of nostalgia for people like all of us, that we want there to still be comics. And look, new comics came out this week for the first time in a couple of months, so I mean that's a step in the right direction. But
that reminds me, I gotta call my shop and see what I can get.
What is your shop, by the way? Let's give them a shout out. Will
Golden Apple Comics on Melrose Boulevard.
Hey,
that's not close to where you live. You should represent a comic shop in the Valley. Come on, you live in the Valley now.
But I've been going to Golden Apple since I moved to LA. So Golden Apple is my bread and butter. And I will drive out of my way to go to my comic book shop.
That's a good shop. That's like the one shop I went to, the one time I went to, the first time I visited LA.
Yeah. Well, I live in Burbank.
Yeah.
So I like Black Cat Comics. They're great. They do a lot of Instagram Live where they'll kind of do like a claim sale. It's like, all right, who wants this? And if you're fast enough, you can get it, that sort of thing. But Neil Adams has a shop in Burbank called the Krusty Bunkers. And so that's right. And Neil will like be there, and they'll do like, Facebook Live videos.
I met him.
Yeah. He's there a lot. Yeah.
I found this really interesting article. It says the owner of the Golden Apple says Wally West is a tool and all the stories should be Barry Allen's. Just weird, FYI.
It's honestly really aggressive and uncalled for, but I'm just gonna let it go because like I don't know why you decided to like fucking pick on my mom and pop comic book store and just fucking bury them.
Also, was he talking about the Wally West from the show? That sounds a little racist.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, actual Jeff, as opposed to Hefe.
Let's be honest. I mean, clearly, Wally West is really the Ben Reilly of superheroes. We all love Barry.
No. So, literally nobody loves Barry Allen, and everyone knows that.
Let me explain the whole problem with Barry Allen.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes.
is a wonderful martyr. He was better off dead.
It's great.
The DC universe was better off with him as a dead character.
Yeah.
Will, did you read Flash 200? So it's like the first Jeff Johns is writing. It was the end of the first Zoom story.
I have all Wally's entire run. So
okay.
Yeah.
So at the end of that issue,
was Linda with the kids when Barry comes back and helps him?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Barry comes back, and he reinstates Wally's secret identity, I think, in that issue.
Yeah.
And Wally says, but Barry, if you do that, no one will know the sacrifice that you made.
Right.
Because they won't know that you were the Flash before me.
Right.
And Barry said, that doesn't matter. He gives us a great speech about being a hero isn't about getting acknowledgement for it.
Yeah.
And I literally cried. Like, that was the best Barry Allen scene. He's much better as a dead guy.
Yeah. I 1,000% agree. Because it's the only time that you have somebody who picks up a mantle and actually makes the mantle more significant than the person who had it before him. Correct. The reason that the Flash is an important character is because Wally picked it up from somebody who basically was like a C-string character. And Wally's like, I have to fill these boots, literally and metaphorically, and become this guy. And the only, the Speed Force, all these wonderful things that were invented for the Flash were invented for Wally. And like, the only reason we have all of these things is because Barry was dead. To give them to him in this very strange but nice storytelling way of being like, I couldn't do this, so you have to do this. And it's like he has to like bear this burden, but he will do it. I don't know. It's just like, that's good storytelling to me. It's lazy, shitty storytelling when they're like, Jeff Johns, just bring Barry Allen back in the Flash Rebirth. And you read that and you're like, this is like not a story. Green Lantern Rebirth has value.
That word.
Flash Rebirth is garbage.
Right, totally different thing. But I understand from a Warner Brothers, we want to make a movie standpoint, that they need to have Barry Allen because you can't do Wally West because the origins do.
That's the problem. I mean, to bring it over to Marvel for a second. I mean, Marvel does the print comic book business at a loss because they want to generate, stories and intellectual property that'll translate into the movies where they make their real money.
Right.
Yeah. Right. I mean, Marvel's movies reference very, very new storylines.
Yeah, Civil War is a perfect example, and
Winter Soldier and Civil War.
Yeah, the Civil War comic book has such an awful ending. It was like Lost. I was like, I was so into this. And Jeff, did you just go to Jurassic World, Jeff DeRay?
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
Hefe?
So you're just going somewhere else that is going to make Will Sterling angry.
No, don't. Okay, if I'm gonna make myself angry, remembering that I said this tomorrow, but it's true, and I said this since I was in college, and I will not surrender on this standpoint, even though it's really brutal, and I get canceled for this. I bought so many tie-ins to Civil War. All the, I wanted to know everything. It was like such a big deal, and I was like such a hardcore Spider-Man fan for so long. I mean, like Wally and Spider-Man were like neck and neck for so long as a kid.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And Peter comes out to support Tony, and I was like, this is bullshit. The Iron Spider costume. I was like, okay, but I'm still here for Peter. So I was like, I tried to, and I like Steve Rogers. Like Captain America was like my close second. Like if Peter and Wally were my number ones, Marvel and DC, then Captain America and Superman were my close second.
You've always said that like Steve Rogers is basically Marvel's Superman. Yeah.
Right. So when Steve in like the first issue of Civil War was like, no, we're not going to do this, I was like, fuck yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea that he would actually be the one to dissent. And when that storyline ended, I told my friends, I said, don't read this. It took 9 months for all of this bullshit to unfold. It is the greatest stillbirth of comic book history.
Yeah, no, it's hugely
it went
disappointing.
All the way to term, and it was a dead baby. And I feel bad saying that, but everyone knows it's true.
No, it's
bad. It sucks.
No, I mean, look, the movie version is much better.
And even then, it's not very good, but it's better than the comics. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's to sort of go back much further to sort of classic, before we wind down, Jeff Winstead, I wanted to ask you, what were to you some of the biggest influences, sort of like the comic book stories or storylines, whether it's individual issues or multi-issue arcs, that were, amongst your favorites, but really it was like, oh, I really want to do this. I want to be a comic book creator.
Well, for sure, Crisis. I mean, that's what got me into comics, and also it's the first time you sort of think that, do people actually get paid to do this work? Like, that's just amazing. Was amazing to me as a kid. Because a kid, I like to doodle, and I thought, well, what can you do with it? I guess I'll be an architect. That's the only job I knew you actually get paid to draw. And so when I saw the guys got paid to do comic books, I just blew my mind. So yeah, Crisis from a storytelling standpoint. What I love about Crisis, we can talk about this on the Crisis episode.
Yeah, let's do a Crisis episode.
Yeah, as soon as I read it, we'll do it.
Come on. I can't believe you've never read. I read the fucking Dark Phoenix story that you let me borrow, and you haven't read the Crisis story that Jeff gave you?
Dark Phoenix is the single greatest comic book story ever written,
no,
so of course
false.
you've read it.
That's not true at all.
The first issue I read was issue 7.
Of Crisis. So that's after 6 is the one where he's holding like dead Supergirl, right?
No, it's 7.
Oh, that is 7. Okay, yeah. So that's your like, oh, look what fun this is, dead Supergirl.
Yeah, that's my lodestone. I guess that's the key to everything for me in comics. So that's the perfect comic book is issue 7.
When did Supergirl die?
And the beautiful thing about it is you see so many characters. I had no idea what was going on, and it was a little bit like in the last episode you guys were talking about Kiss. And like,
yeah, you're like, wait a minute. So
if you don't love Kiss, you can't listen to a single episode of the Bladtcast where we're really deep.
At the same time, when you're trying to quantify the Avengers, you're like, okay, so I guess Wonder Man is Mark St. John, but like Black Captain Marvel is really Bruce Kulick.
So like, I don't get the Kiss thing, but I totally understand.
Most people don't.
Like when you get into it, like the deep dive to all the backstory and all this kind of stuff. And so what Crisis did for me is when I was confused, like the story is linear, like it totally makes sense, but there's all these characters in the background. You have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
And instead of that pushing me away from comics, it actually made me super interested. So I would buy those official handbook of the Marvel Universe. DC's version was called Who's Who.
Oh yeah, no, I loved the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. I don't even like it would have a picture like a drawing and then just typewritten text.
Yeah.
I poured over those because I wanted to know about all the characters, and obviously we didn't have Wikipedia, we didn't have any kind of internet.
Right.
So I had I don't know, I would read those so intently, and I was like, ooh, what issue did that happen? I want to know this. I want to read these stories. To this day, there's stuff that I read about that I would still like I know very little. I haven't read the Kree-Skrull War, but I would love to. Like the Avengers, like I don't know, that's like the 160s, like Roy Thomas. I would love to read all of that. But I've had it in my head for like 30 years that I want to read that.
I have to ask now. So Jeff, I don't know how familiar you are with like some of the modern storylines, but I think that Crisis on Infinite Earths does a good job at saying like, hey, here's this big expansive world you can be part of, and non-readers can kind of jump in because they sort of have like I know Superman and Flash and Batman and Wonder Woman and whatever. Final Crisis, written by Grant Morrison, my greatest nemesis, which I know that you love him, but we also we had the same consensus on the Green Lantern later. Final Crisis, written by him, was like, I'm going to reach into the most obscure section of characters that literally no one can know and be part of, and make a whole summer seminal story out of this. And I was in college when Final Crisis came out, and I was like, I know some of these characters, but I'm like angry that this story is being told in this like arrogant way. I don't know. There's a difference, right? Crisis on Infinite Earths is very accessible. Something like Final Crisis, where you have this like sort of head up his ass writer who has written lots of great stories, was just like, who gave him permission to do that?
Yeah, Final Crisis is trash.
It's garbage. Thank you.
Just to give validation to what you're saying. Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
But but speaking of like who's who, like so when I know Jeff Duray made fun that I said that Blue Beetle was a gymnast. Like this was the kind of information you get in Who's Who. It would say he's an Olympic level athlete, Olympic level gymnast. You know, it would give all these sort of stats, and so I just love that stuff. So yeah, I love that. Like Batman Year One, I always like that early Frank Miller stuff.
Oh yeah.
That blew my mind. Like to me, that's the comic you would hand to like a non-reader. Like it's a great sort of. I mean, not a child, obviously, but someone who. I mean, I was an early teen, so someone who like wanted to read comics but didn't know a whole lot about it, but knew the basic idea of Batman. Like it's a great book.
Even The Dark Knight Returns, I was surprised that friends of mine in college, they took like a modern mythos class, and comic books was like part of that, which I thought was cool. And they said we had to read Dark Knight Returns. And I was like, well, you can borrow my copy if you want. But I was surprised how many people who had never really read comic books before really loved The Dark Knight Returns. And you don't have a traditional Batman story with that. You have, hey, we're giving you old 50-year-old Batman coming back. And people loved it. And I think
the word you're looking for is Affleck.
Affleck, yeah. Batfleck.
Batfleck.
Batfleck, yeah. But no, I was surprised. People want, when you know the character, even in a simple way, you want big stories from them. Yeah.
And by the way, how stupid is Warner Brothers for not doing a Dark Knight Returns movie with Michael Keaton right now? Like, how awesome would that be?
Well, we had the design with the Ben Affleck thing with Batman vs Superman.
Yeah, I mean they were certainly that was what they were borrowing.
I actually just read an article today that said they were hoping the Snyder stuff.
I read the same thing.
Yeah, said we'll bring back Ben. So they're hoping that the Snyder cut of Justice League will bring the possibility of bringing Ben Affleck back into Batman roles going forward.
I knew that was going to be another thing.
But Batman is Robert Pattinson, so I don't.
But that movie supposedly was its own thing, right? Same as Joker.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, it's all interesting. What were you going to say, Winstead?
Barry Allen is the fuck.
So for people only listening to the audio, you're missing out on that is the TV Flash where it says Barry Allen is the Flash.
Jeff has been searching for something for literally like 45 minutes. I'm sorry, Hefe. Hefe has been searching for something for 45 minutes.
It's a sight gag for a podcast. Come on.
Come on. What's wrong with that?
Just to spite me. But the best part about it is that it looks like weirdly Russian, like communist propaganda.
Yeah, no. It's like those posters of Stalin.
It's like the Americans. Yeah, like if you watch a new episode, like season of the Americans, like that would be the poster.
Yeah,
But he's also way too happy at the position of Arrow.
Yeah, why is he? Yeah, Barry Allen is the
because
Flash.
he's the kid
an arrow.
He's catching the Green Arrow.
He's the kid from Glee. He's always happy.
He's catching the Green Arrow. And only the people watching the YouTube clip can see me do this.
You're welcome. I drove traffic to YouTube where we can make money on the
Bladtcast
podcast.
YouTube channel, Bladtcast on YouTube. Interestingly, Jeff Winstead, I know that, dealing with alternate realities, there's very little read stories. There's two very little read stories that I know you're a big fan of that I've taken the time to read, which is Marvel 2-in-1 number 50 and Marvel 2-in-1 number 100, which is the Thing going back in time and helping an earlier version of himself not be the Thing anymore. And it sort of leads to this. That's sort of the weird thing sometimes when you deal with alternate realities and different timelines. It's certainly the case with the Marvel series What If, that if you change something, if you change one little thing, all of a sudden, literally in the case of the issues that I'm referencing, Nazis are in charge of America in the 80s. So like, it's basically that series from, I guess it's a book first, but Man in the High Castle. It's basically like, if Ben Grimm weren't the Thing, the Red Skull would have come back and taken over, and the Nazis would be running the United States in the mid-'80s. It's kind of an interesting take, but that alternate timeline is kind of a fascinating thing, but it's like such a stark reality, and no pun intended for Tony. But how much of that factored into your sort of fascination with alternate realities?
Well, what's interesting is issue 50 is really just a time travel story. And I read that. It was one of the first comics I ever had. Like some friend of mine found it in like the teacher's lounge or something in junior high and just gave it to me. And so that was almost
Which
like
is funny because the teacher's lounge at my high school was filled with like amyl nitrate and poppers and
oh yeah, well mine was too.
Seconals and Seconals
on top of the fridge.
Yeah.
My teacher's lounge was filled with Doritos and Diet Cokes and apathy.
Apathy. Anyway, sorry, Jeff Winstead.
No. So, like in that comics, it's a time travel story, and of course, not to spoil it for people, but I'm going to.
Yeah, you can spoil it because who's going to go like? Although I searched out Marvel 2-in-1 number 100, I don't think most people will.
Yeah. So basically, Ben Grimm goes back in time. Reed develops a formula to cure the Thing, and turns out though it only would have worked when the Thing was early in the metamorphosis. So just like within a few months of the accident that caused him to become the Thing. So Reed leaves the room, and Ben Grimm has a big idea that I'm going to use the Dr. Doom time machine that we have like in our warehouse. I'm going to go back in time and give it to myself. Then I'll come back to the future, and I'll be like a normal human. And so he does that, and there's a great story of him fighting himself, and it's a lot of splash pages. It's a very fun comic. It's a really good comic for younger kids, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, he gives the formula to himself. He goes back to the present day, and nothing's changed. He's still a Thing. And so Reed comes back into the room and says, "Oh yeah, the thing is, when you mess with the timeline, you don't change it. You just create an alternate timeline."
Mm.
So in that issue, you get the impression that blew my mind as a kid. Like, oh, this is wild, you know. And so you get the impression it's just an alternate timeline. So that was a fun book. Years later, I get the sequel, which is issue 100. So that was issue 50 of Marvel Team Up. This was issue 100. And issue 100 is grim, no pun intended. I mean, it's like Christian was saying, there's Nazis. They explained in that issue that he had not gone back in time. He had only gone to an alternate reality and sort of set these events in motion that caused like the Red Skull to come in power. It's a really dark story.
Yeah, I mean, it's very reminiscent of Days of Future Past, where like the alternate reality is just so rough, which Chris Claremont even admitted that he was inspired by a story from the first Doctor on Doctor Who, where it's an alternate Earth where the Daleks run everything, and it was, it's just like, oh, what's the worst thing you can think of? Yeah, it's that, and then kind of double it, you know.
Hey, remember? Listen, the Motivation Report has concluded, but
it has concluded. Yes,
working on a sequel to Superman Relative Dimensions, and it may have something to do with exactly what you're talking about. And maybe there's a part for you, Christian.
Do I get to play the Doctor's granddaughter, Susan?
You only can be Susan forever. Yeah.
I would love to play Susan.
Yeah.
Should I audition for it now?
Yes, actually, yeah. Let's do a scene.
Grandfather?
No. Stop. I gotta start. Susan, my granddaughter, how are you? Oh my goodness, I've come through time and space.
Right. So wait a minute. So the doctor is Orson Welles doing a champagne commercial?
Yes.
The French!
For all you know, it could be the 15th Doctor. We're outside of the realm of time and space on how we're going to do auditions. So, suck it up, and this is what we're going to do. Here we go. Get ready. Everybody get ready. Hefe, Jeff, get ready.
We're ready.
Ah, granddaughter, It's so good to see you. I've been lost in time and space for many years. You look so old.
And so much less beautiful, grandfather.
Why do you sound like a boy, granddaughter? You have a boyish quality
The world
about
has
you.
changed so much since you were last here.
Oh my goodness! Why? How?
Oh, the French.
In what capacity has it changed?
Anyway, well, we can save that for we'll do a whole audition episode. So
Can I make a suggestion though?
yes, please.
Yes.
Can we please sample parts of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 when they return to feudal Japan?
Yes.
Because
please
that
do.
scene reminded me of the seminal scene where the grandfather and Yoshi are reunited after the village.
Honestly,
grandfather! Yoshi!
Yeah, honestly,
Yoshi!
I was about to say Jeff, but I mean Hefe. Nothing gets to my heart closer than you referencing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, which is arguably the worst version of the movies, but nostalgically is one of the best. So thank you for.
They also had some of the best toys. Like those Ninja Turtles had like liver spots on them.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a lot.
Which is weird because now Corey Feldman has liver spots on him. So
also, I have a random comic booky question related to alternate timelines. I remember from like it was like a Justice League cartoon. There was a version where they went back in time or something, and I'm pretty sure it was like Vandal Savage had brought like extra technology to the Nazis, and they were like fighting super teched up Nazis in World War II at a certain point. And it was a kind of like somebody messed with the timeline or alternate timelines kind of thing.
So wait,
that was from the comics or just the show?
Jeff DeRay, is this something you remember watching, or a wet dream that you had that the Nazis were super powerful and were able to win?
Well, both. I mean, it's what I masterbate to get to sleep at night. But this is from like
no, that's not
Justice League Ultimate or something.
No. Yeah.
Oh,
it's Justice League Ultimate or one of those ones where it was like the early 2000s. Warner Brothers had their Justice League cartoons that would the Justice League story.
Does either Jeff Winstead or Will Sterling know about this?
Unlimited is what you're thinking.
What did I say?
Yeah, it says like Justice League Ultimate. I don't remember.
I knew it was a U.
Yeah, I don't remember that particular episode, but like, were there freedom fighters in that? Like, was there a character called?
I'm sure it was. I know it had something to do with essentially, obviously, Vandal Savage and him. I feel like it was Vandal had figured out a way to go back into the timeline because he had been around for so long. Something like that allowed him to go back and change the past because he had been there at the time.
So DC does have an alternate Earth where the Nazis won. And so in modern day, there's a group of characters called the Freedom Fighters, Uncle Sam, the Human Bomb, Phantom Lady, Doll Man. It was just as silly as it sounds. So I don't know if they were referencing that. I do remember some of those characters appearing in that series. So
an alternate Earth where the Nazis won, also known as Durayville.
Just like Pleasantville, but different.
But more pleasant.
Yeah.
Much more pleasant.
Well,
and cheaper labor.
Jeff Winstead, people can find the alternate on Comixology, and I guess separately from that, it is available on Amazon, but Comixology Unlimited. And I don't know, I guess issue 7, it's going to happen at some point, right?
Oh, yeah. So we kind of digressed about the whole, like, what's next conversation. But, yeah, it'll happen at some point. It's just a matter of what form. So I'd like to go into print, but because of the way the comic book shops are with the distributions and all that kind of stuff, numbers, print would probably be some sort of a crowdfunding thing, like Indiegogo. Sure. So that's something I'm considering. So,
and as we referenced, you and your lovely wife live in Palm Springs.
That's right.
And obviously, California frowns upon non-essential travel, but I feel like, you tell me, Jeff Winstead, if you think this is accurate, would it be essential travel for 3 guys to spend a weekend tripping on mushrooms at a rented Airbnb somewhere in Palm Springs?
Great question.
I think so. If you can find one that would accept you.
I'm going to Joshua Tree in 2 weeks. By the way, Hefe, I'll be texting you. But P.S. Here's Wally West. You're welcome, bitches. And also, no, we should go to Palm Springs together as a group and trip on mushrooms.
Well, but Jeff DeRay is moving in like a month, right, Jeff DeRay?
Yeah, that's why we're going to do all this before he leaves.
Joshua Tree is open. So I
gotta see what I'm allowed to do. You know, I'm about to relocate down to the OC for about a month, so I have to check the guidelines.
Fake news. I heard it's called fake news.
That's real news. Hey, you know what? In Orange County right now, you can get a haircut, so that's all the reason I need to go there.
Can you get a Wally West cut like this? This weird
I mean, not that hair color, but that Wally West cut, I think I could rock that. I think that would be good. Yeah. Right. Well, Jeff Winstead, we've talked about where people can find the book, but where they can find you, it's just at Jeff Winstead on Twitter, right?
Yes, on Twitter or Instagram if you're so inclined.
Yeah. Yes. And hopefully we're able to do the non-essential travel because I love Palm Springs. It's been more than a year since I've been out that way, and I would love to return. But that's obviously not in the cards right now. But Jeff DeRay, people can find you at Jeff DeRay, but you don't want them to find you. You want them to find at DeRay_Jeff, right?
I think that's probably
no. Hefe. He's the alternate version. Yeah, Jeff Winstead is the Jeff. Hefe is the alternate Jeff.
And Will Starling, the replacement for the motivation report, yet to be announced, coming some point soon.
It's going to be called the Wally West podcast, and you can wait for it. Yeah.
How about the Wally Best cast? At Will Starling _ because that old guy still has at Will Starling.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Hashtag fact. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. It's always fun to talk to our pal Jeff Winstead, and we look forward to his stuff.
Real quick, can I? Yeah. I just want to say something because this shit is hard. Being in quarantine is hard. Being an artist, pursuing your dreams is hard. Jeff, honestly, reading your books, the fact that you even I'm reading 6 published issues of your fucking comic book is incredible. I have nothing I do web series, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But you have a thing, you create it, you made it. It's amazing to be able to read it. I think that's super commendable and you should be super proud. And I think it's really wonderful. And I don't know, I'm emotional, but I'm just saying. I think it's awesome.
I agree. It's impressive because
I think it's awesome that you fucking set out to make a thing and you made it and it's good. It's not just a thing where we have you on a podcast to tell you fake this is good. It's good and you should be proud.
Well, thanks. I appreciate everybody checking it out and it was nice of you guys to read it and have me on and chit chat about it. So it's cool.
No, we're always happy to do it. But you think about it, we all have friends that are like, hey man, we should make a movie, you know?
Comic book. Yeah, exactly.
Or
some of us are taking 10 years to do a podcast, you know?
Well, that's
but see, that's the thing is you're an artist and you need the 10 years to make that podcast.
Has anyone else noticed how this has been going through my head for most of it?
Yes. But you know what's also crazy is that we're coming up on the 10 years of this fake podcast. So you better get yourself ready for when it becomes a reality.
We're only 7.5 years into the Bladtcast, and Jeff DeRay didn't roll into the Bladtcast until about year 2.
I'm just saying.
It's still a little ways off. Jeff DeRay has plenty of time.
So
it's hump day.
The debut episode will be the 10th anniversary episode.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what we're looking for.
Perfect.
But Jeff Winstead, we'll have you back as soon as I read Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Oh yeah.
When I relocate down to the OC, I'm bringing that trade paperback with me. I expect to read it.
And my Aquaman comic books.
I can give those back to you. I read them. I like Aquaman. I think he's a much more interesting character than he was on the Super Friends.
I'll have to lend you the Aquaman issues that Jeff sent to me.
Oh,
I think
Jeff Winstead sent you the hook hand ones, right?
Well, no, not hook hand, but a fun 4-part miniseries from the 80s.
Blue costume.
He's had that hook hand for a while, right?
The blue costume. Yeah, it was after that.
Here's what I would like. I would like for, in addition to the radio play that we have coming back from Will, another one, which is the dramatic reading of Crisis on Infinite Earths with sound effects, all from his mouth. And to go so that Christian doesn't have to read it, he can just...
Yeah, I would. Is there any chance that we could have Will Sterling do a Will Smith impression, and it'll be called "Crisis on Infinite Earths"?
Oh, only that is possible.
Yeah. All right, that's what we need.
Yeah. All right, bye.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again to Jeff Winstead at Jeff Winstead at Twitter and Instagram. Will Sterling at Will Sterling _ Jeff Winstead Jeff Duray at Jeff Duray, and of course at Duray _ Jeff.
Duray.
And never forget the mediocre. He will be